We Are the Water Protectors is about a real protest from 2016, but it can still be classified as fiction because the protagonist and the protagonist's context are imagined. But it is very, very realistic fiction because this is about the Standing Rock Sioux community and the protests that they had of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was threatening the Missouri River. That was the water source for the community there and for so many other communities. And so in reading this, you can talk with your classes not only about fiction, but about real threats to water supplies, which is something that here in this region, as well as throughout the United States, communities are dealing with right now. So, how do we talk about these things? Well, first, this is a Caldecott winning book. Let's start with the pictures. So, the images in this book do a beautiful job of not only supporting, but expanding upon the message and expanding upon it in ways that children can interpret at levels that they are able to understand or feel comfortable understanding. That's part of the beautiful importance of pictures, which you all have covered in your illustrators projects. So, look at some of these images. How do these images, here we see the pipeline coming over the horizon, here we see the pipeline, and here we see the pipeline. How do these images of that pipeline and its possible impact, its threat to the local watershed work symbolically? What effect could this have on the child reader? How can they read it at different levels as they are ready and able to without having that message forced on them? So, one, here when we see it off in the distance, sort of a distance from the water supply here and a distance from the protagonist, there's that distance is comforting. Even as it's a threat, it's still a threat that's not immediately threatening the child protagonist, which is the character that the reader's going to identify with most closely. Now here, where it talks about how this is threatening the water and the wildlife there, the statement is that it can wreck everything, but it's a very limited, very short statement. How does the image go beyond that in ways that the reader can interpret as they're ready? Well, first of all, if you'll notice that the portions of the animals that are closest to the pipeline are skeletal, implying death, that's a pretty strong, pretty important message here, right? And something that was historically happening along this pipeline. But how does the image mediate that so the threat is not overwhelming to the child viewer? Well, look at the front parts of the animals are still alive. There's a suggestion that the animals are going to escape, and the child viewer doesn't necessarily need to interpret this as immediate death. They can interpret this at different layers. And then here, as we see the pipeline as this sort of living, active threat, it is a symbolic threat. And notice how although the plants are dead, we don't see it attacking any animal or human life. The threat has again been mediated so that the child viewer can negotiate this at different levels. They don't have to feel personally threatened. They don't have to feel like the heroine is in imminent danger. They can experience this in layers. They can interpret this as an immediate and active threat, but they don't have to. And then how do other images suggest hope and unity and connections between the heroine and a more powerful group who can achieve, who have the potential to fight back? Well, let's start with these images of community. These circular images, these images that involve people joining hands, circling the earth, circling here, and uniting in a group here. How does that sort of image empower the child viewer? Well, here it places the child as a potential leader in this, right? But the child is not alone and not responsible for uniting or organizing the group. They can feel that sense of empowerment and leadership, and yet it is always in the context of being supported by others. And then how do these sorts of images, like what we are assuming is the child protagonist, because that's the narrator here, the speaker, is releasing a turtle into the wild. And the child is part of this continual circle of life on planet Earth and this circle of community standing up against this pipeline. How do these suggest that the child is not only in a human group that is beyond themselves, but perhaps in a more cosmic relationship? Even images like this, where the child is sort of flowing into this natural symbolic world. What is that doing to suggest empowerment and hope, even as it's not belittling or lessening the threat? How is color working here? How is symbol working here? Think about all of those things and then look at question 8. So these questions come from a national website here. And they're questions that are included as possible things that teachers could offer to students reading this book in Read Across America. And the last question is, look at the illustrations. How are they realistic? What do they represent? Is that the sort of question you think is going to evoke a strong discussion from students, particularly students who are the audience for this Caldecott-winning picture book? How could this be better worded? How could you lead students into a discussion and an analysis of pictures here that goes beyond just this discussion question? As you're thinking about that, think about all these discussion questions. These are great points, but do you think they would work with the intended audience? Now, what about these questions here? And these activities, are these any stronger, any different? Why? How? Think about these different things, because the resources you find might be something that are just a starting point and really are more aimed from adults at adults. They're not something that you should be copying and pasting onto a worksheet for students. Something that would need to be changed dramatically before we start bringing this into a discussion with the intended student audience here. So think about these things as we're looking at Water Protector and the ways that you could engage students with this book and with not only the very stark reality that it's presenting and dealing with a threat from 2016, but how these images can empower and give hope to students who may find themselves in very similar situations, even right here in our local region.